Sue Romanoff, and today I'm catching up with the CEO of Mendus. Mendus is a European clinical stage immuno-oncology company developing off-the-shelf therapies. Welcome, Erik.
Hi, Sue. Good to see you.
Great. We've seen some positive AML data to date. It might be helpful if you can recap some of the highlights and also the benefits of being off-the-shelf treatment.
Yes, I think it's a good angle to add to the question, Sue. So on the one hand, and most importantly, we have observed long-term, so durable clinical remissions in AML, which is rare because AML is very aggressive disease. And there's actually only one potentially curative approach, which is called bone marrow or hematopoietic stem cell transplant, where you completely replace the immune system of the patient with a donor immune system. And that is potentially curative in the sense that it is an immunotherapy and it leads to long-term control over the disease. But for many patients, that is not achievable. And also, initially, you have to get rid of as much disease as possible. And the best way to do it is with high-intensity chemotherapy. But if you are not eligible for transplant or if you can't find a transplant in time, the disease comes back very quickly. And it's particularly associated with residual disease. And nowadays, we can measure that with sensitive molecular methods. And that's called measurable residual disease or MRD. And particularly patients that after initial therapy still have an MRD positive status, they will relapse very quickly. And what we have now observed is that if we provide our product vididencel after the initial chemotherapy to patients with an MRD positive status, in the most recent readout of our Phase II clinical trial, we observed long-term survival in the majority of patients. So 14 out of 20 patients were still alive at a median follow-up of 37 months. And the median relapse-free survival stood at 2.5 years. So it means that we're seeing long-term durable clinical remissions in AML. So that's why we are very excited. And we also combined it with so-called immunomonitoring. So we could actually demonstrate how the immune system of the patients related initially at baseline, but then also after treatment with vididencel to the clinical effect. And what we saw was a very clear connection between the patients that were able to build up an immune response and a very robust immune response after being vaccinated with our product, and also then resulting in these durable clinical remissions, and the patients that failed to respond. And what we observed in those patients actually was that their immune system was basically malfunctioning because of the disease and because of the very high doses of chemotherapy they had undergone. So the fact that we now see these long-term survival in this larger group of patients in the Phase II, combined with the fact that the immune system really responds well to the therapy, that gives us a high level of confidence to take this program forward into late-stage clinical development. And the reason off-the-shelf is so important is, first of all, the logistics. So what we do is we have a proprietary leukemic cell line, so it's actually a cancer cell line, which we grow to large quantities. And then using our expertise in dendritic cell biology, we reprogram these cells to express a dendritic phenotype. And that shifts the cancer cells from being poorly immunogenic to being very immunogenic. And that triggers the immune responses we just described also with respect to the clinical response we have observed. But because it's cell line based, we can make this product whenever we want and we store it frozen. So it's immediately available to patients. And the reason that is so important is, on the one hand, commercial, right? Because you can much more scalable way manufacture the product when you compare it to product that has to be designed on a patient-by-patient basis, like autologous products, for example, or products based on what's called neoantigens, where people first have to do genetic screening of the tumor and then design a personalized vaccine. Our product is a whole cell that carries the full spectrum of tumor-associated antigens, which we have made immunogenic with this dendritic cell biology. And the fact that it's off the shelf, so it's available on demand, is particularly relevant because cancer vaccines, and what we've also seen with our product vididencel, are expected to work best in low disease setting. And the reason is that active immunity, so training your own immune system, takes some time, usually a few weeks, and sometimes also some booster vaccinations to really build up a robust immune response. It's also the only long-lasting immunity, right? But you need to have the time to build it up. And when you have an off-the-shelf product, you don't have a lead time with respect to the product that you have to, for example, make out of the patient material, or for which you first have to screen patient material. And certainly in these low disease settings, and certainly in aggressive disease like AML, you want the product to be available immediately on demand so that you can start treating the patient when it is needed without any delay. So the competitive advantage we see in the fact that our product is off the shelf is that it is, on the one hand, easier to work with and also better scalable as a commercial product. Very importantly, it's also immediately available to patients who need it in clinical practice.
Yeah. And it's also it's nice to see the progression on the Cadence combination trial. Could you share an overview of the trial and comment on the support you've seen from external parties? I believe I've seen the Australian Leukaemia and Lymphoma group have given you some backing.
Yes, so our current trial, the one I just described, is a monotherapy trial in AML patients with an MRD positive status. The next step is to expand the clinical development of this program. And one of the bigger steps we were able to take was to team up with ALLG, the Australasian Leukaemia and Lymphoma group, who are very active. Actually, they already are around for 50 years doing this extensive clinical research, and they've supported very big programs, including, for example, the oral azacitidine product Onureg, which is now approved. They were also a substantial part of that registration trial. And so it's a combination of a large group of clinical centers that are part of ALLG, but also a very deep and dedicated expertise in running these trials. So the fact that they adopted our product as part of their network and are willing to perform a large trial with our product called the AMLM22 Cadence trial, or in short, the Cadence trial, was for us a super recognition. And where the trial currently stands is we got ethics committee approval end of March. Now we are opening up the hospitals that will take part. ALLG, as part of their scientific days, which took place 2 weeks ago in May, announced that they will open 9 centers dedicated to this trial. And the trial will initially be in 40 patients, after which there will be an initial safety assessment, whereby we split the patients in oral azacitidine only, so a tablet form of azacitidine, which is currently approved for AML maintenance, or oral azacitidine plus our product. And then, assuming that there will be no safety issues, which we don't expect based on the safety profile of both products, it will seamlessly move into a larger patient population, up to a total of 140 patients in a randomized controlled trial. So that's for us a very important expansion of the clinical development of vididencel in AML, with a very respected group, ALLG, supporting that trial. And it's part of our larger strategy to prepare the product for late stage development, including a company-sponsored registration trial.
Could you help me better understand the later stages of your clinical development that are taking shape in AML?
Yeah, so on the one hand, the Cadence trial in itself is a very valuable trial, and it will also, to a certain extent, de-risk our late-stage trial strategy for the product, because we can, of course, benefit from the data we generate in the Cadence trial. But a registration trial for the product is a separate and parallel exercise, right, where we will set up a worldwide network of clinical centers, and we already have opened up a lot of centers in Europe based on the ongoing Phase II trial, and now also expanding it with the clinical trial network in Australia. We've also opened up the IND in the US to be able to perform clinical trials there. So what we are currently doing is setting the preparations for that global registration trial, while also making optimal use of the data we expect to come out of the Cadence trial. So a registration trial will mean that we design a trial that will hopefully lead to registration, which of course we are designing in close alignment with the regulatory agencies, with the FDA in the US and the EMA in Europe. But also, very importantly, we need to make sure that we have the production capacity to not only engage in that trial, but in the end also for commercial launch of the product. And for that, we have set in place a collaboration with a company called Northex. They're based in Sweden, and we have a manufacturing alliance with them, which we started second half of last year. And we now built a facility specific for vididencel, which is up and running. And we have initiated the so-called tech transfer process. So we are now transferring the process that we have developed here in our facilities in Leiden, in the Netherlands, which is a non-GMP setting, but where all the process engineering has taken place to design such a large-scale process. And we are transferring now that process to the GMP facilities of Northex. Now, the preparations for the trial and the initial GMP manufacturing, so the material that we need to treat patients out of that large-scale production process, is aimed to be ready mid next year, so mid 25. But that's the most important part in the preparation of the registration trial strategy.
So there seems to be a slight shift in your strategy for your second asset. Could you provide some color?
Well, I think we had a challenge with the product called ilixadencel, which is an intratumoral primer. It's a complete different product. So we make it from healthy donor dendritic cells, which we inject into solid tumors, so a very different setting. And that whole landscape, immuno-oncology landscape, has changed. And the checkpoint inhibitors, the immune checkpoint inhibitors, with Keytruda being the largest one today, have completely changed the treatment of solid tumors. And the outcome is that Keytruda is now a very big drug. In 2023, the global revenues were around $25 billion. So it captured a broad range of solid tumors that respond to these checkpoint inhibitors. And it's only the minority of patients in those tumors that respond that benefit from it. But once those patients benefit, they have a long-term survival benefit. So it's a very disruptive new way to treat cancers. But what has not materialized is that a lot of other immunotherapies thought they would benefit from, or companies developing those immunotherapies thought they would benefit from the checkpoint inhibitors. And that has not really materialized. So where the checkpoint inhibitors are effective, they will treat patients successfully. But it's been very difficult to raise the bar on top of the checkpoint inhibitors with other immunotherapy approaches. And it meant for us that we had to change the strategy completely, because we were running a larger trial in renal cell carcinoma, and the checkpoint inhibitors are now first-line treatment, and they show similar efficacy to what we have observed with our product ilixadencel. So we needed to reposition the product. And also, we needed to make the manufacturing process more robust. So we took care of all of that. So we basically completed all the ongoing trials, and we have optimized the manufacturing process. But we now also took a very radical choice, which is that we will look for tumors that are currently not responding to checkpoint inhibitors. And soft tissue sarcomas is a specific group of tumors that we have selected as the new target sort of indication for ilixadencel. And we are now preparing for a trial in that indication. And we hope to announce that anytime soon what that exactly will comprise.
So I have a tendency to focus on AML because it's an exciting area, and Mendus has made a lot of headway. But I believe you're working on ovarian cancer also.
Yeah, so I think the original concept that we developed as a company is to use vaccination with vididencel as a maintenance therapy. And we cast out the net quite wide. We looked for two indications with different dynamic, with AML being very aggressive disease with respect to the speed by which it relapses, and ovarian cancer also being very deadly disease. It's actually the deadliest gynecological cancer because it also has a high recurrence rate, but a little bit slower than AML. So AML is really a matter of weeks to months usually before it relapses. With ovarian cancer, the majority of women have it back in the first year, and certainly within the first 2 years after initial treatment. So we are trying now to see if we can also pick up a clinical signal in ovarian cancer. But we first do that in a phase I trial to look for the immune responses, which we've also observed in AML, to see if they really are boosted by the product. We look for safety, which is, of course, very important when you enter a new indication. Those initial data look good. So we have already presented some initial data in ovarian cancer showing that we pick up immune responses against antigens that were demonstrated to be relevant for ovarian cancer. And we have shown a very good safety profile, like we've also observed in our other trials with vididencel. Now, initially, we will present some data at an upcoming conference, the ESMO Gynecological Oncology meeting, which we just announced that we will present. But the real readout of the trial, the primary readout, will take place in the second half of the year. And then we can say more about how we can take the program forward and what the data look like.
So in talking about innovation, you remain active in the preclinical research. And could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I think we have a very active research lab, and also we have built up expertise around dendritic cell biology, which gives us a very good basis to develop novel products. So while we are transforming ourselves from a research company to a late-stage clinical development company, we do not forget about the research, because it's also fueling our deeper product pipeline. And one of the principles that we have investigated is whether we can use dendritic cell biology to improve other cell-based therapies, because dendritic cells have a natural role in the immune system. They basically help other immune cells develop into effective cells against cancer, for example, or viral infections. One very interesting cell type is called natural killer cells, or NK cells. And they form a first line of defense against infections, but they also play an important role in tumors. And for example, a specific type of natural killer cells called memory or adaptive NK cells have been shown to have a strong correlation with clinical outcome in blood-borne tumors, which of course falls within our strategy. And what we have recently discovered is that we can use our platform, which is called DC-1 platform, to train natural killer cells to expand, particularly NK cells with the memory phenotype. And that's an interesting finding. So all of a sudden we have in our preclinical pipeline a way to make natural killer cells, and what we recently presented at a number of conferences, the Innate Killer Cell Summit and the CIMT conference, is that we can make these cells to therapeutic quantities, and specifically the memory NK cells, which have been shown to be not only clinically relevant, but also, for example, very robust in their persistence in the body, which means that an immune therapy based on those memory NK cells is expected to have a beneficial effect over just, let's say, regular NK cells that have been expanded. So for us, it's an important program. Again, it's in the preclinical setting. So, of course, the main focus of the company will remain on the clinical programs, but we do continue to work on that earlier stage pipeline as well.
With all that's going on, it would be helpful if you could briefly summarize what investors should look for in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, so I think, like I said, the company is now shifting gears and moving from, let's say, an early clinical stage company to a late stage clinical company. And that is actually, I would say, 99% of what we do. So the deeper pipeline we now discussed in more detail, including the ilixadencel clinical program and the preclinical NK cell program, is ongoing, but the main focus for the company will be on taking the vididencel program forward in acute myeloid leukemia. And for the ovarian cancer program, we have to wait and see what the data tell us. But in AML, we have three important pillars, which is on the one hand, the current setting, which is the post-chemo patients that we have treated in our phase II trial, which is ongoing, and for which we are now expanding the clinical development with the Cadence trial. The second important part is the preparations for registration trial. So to have everything in place to be ready to enter the clinic for registration trial is also an important focus for us as a company. And the third pillar is that we will also look to potentially broaden the positioning of the product towards additional AML maintenance patient populations. So that is our main focus, and on that we will update the market in the next 12 to 18 months. And for the rest, we can expect readouts from the Cadence trial. We'll have an additional readout from the ongoing trial scheduled for the second half of this year. We have the ovarian cancer readout scheduled for the second half of this year. And then going into 25, obviously, all the big steps we plan to take to make the program ready for the registration trial, including making sure that we have the protocol ready and that the GMP manufacturing is up and running. So that's the main things to look out for, Sue.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Erik. Thank you all for joining us here today. If you'd like to learn more about Mendus, please refer to edisongroup.com. Thank you.
Thanks.